Hello, and welcome to the Drone Network, the only podcast in the air and on the airwaves. I am your host, Bryce Bladen, and on this show, we document the tech, people, and projects expanding the drone industry as we know it. Today's topic: the US is restricting foreign drone tech, but are domestic alternatives actually ready to fly? Today's guest, Mike Horton, CEO of HYFIX. Mike Horton is the CEO of HYFIX Spatial Intelligence and the project creator of GEODNET. His career in autonomous systems spans decades. He co-founded Crossbow Technology in '95 while at UC Berkeley, sold it to Moog Aerospace in 2011, served as CTO at, and I'm going to say this wrong, Asinia, also CTO at Anello Photonics, and now working on HYFIX. A pleasure to have you on the show, Mike.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
From self-driving tractors to drones and robotics, walk us through your journey.
Yeah, so I started out at UC Berkeley working on MEMS-based sensors, accelerometers, and gyros. And we had the idea to use these accelerometers and gyros that were being made in silicon chip-scale accelerometers and gyros for virtual reality. And this was back in 1995, a little before virtual reality was ready for prime time. The compute displays weren't quite there. But what we found with that sensor technology was that we could apply it to things like unmanned systems for autopilot and guidance. And I built up my first company, Crossbow, which did integrated inertial navigation systems for drones and for early autonomous systems. And I sold that, as you mentioned, to Moog Aerospace. So that's kind of what kicked off my career in the field of navigation and localization and control systems. And the application that's, I think, the most exciting for all that kind of tech these days, and has been for a while, is autonomy. And that spans robotics, self-driving cars, and of course, drones. And I think drones is one of the premier applications, actually, of autonomy and robotics and the impact that it has had across so many different industries.
It's truly undeniable, but I'm curious, what drew you to autonomous systems so early? As you mentioned, you were already in VR in '95. How'd you get to autonomous systems? What's changed since then?
Well, I think the key thing that's making these systems more viable now is the sensor cost, actually. So the sensor quality and cost has come down, I'd say, much faster than Moore's Law. So if you were to look back when Google first started putting self-driving cars on their road, the cost to, do, say, LiDAR, for example, at that time was like $50,000, $60,000 for a LiDAR. And now production vehicles are rolling off the line with LiDARs that are under $200. And even DJI drones are including small line count LiDARs in consumer products. And the same thing can be true for the sort of whole image processing pipeline. Same thing can be said for the precise positioning pipeline. When I started my career, RTK was barely just a sort of a research topic. How can you get to centimeter accuracy with GPS? And now you've got a global network like GEODNET providing you RTK corrections almost anywhere you are on the planet. And you've got chipsets at well under $50 that can implement high precision centimeter accurate localization. So these sensor costs coming way down at the same time as compute has obviously improved, and at the same time as like AI has become something that really works and is really usable. That combination is what's made physical AI and autonomy, embodied AI, robotics, all the different things you can call it, name it, actually really super practical right now. And when the cost is low for the hardware and the functionality is high for the level of autonomy delivered, you get ROI. And that means that a customer can buy these systems and, very quickly experience a benefit, return on investment on it, whether that's, shooting drone photography for fun or for real estate, or doing something really advanced like a Waymo self-driving car. You can make these systems economically viable. And that's the key to really getting them to scale.
Well, speaking of scale, speaking of making things viable, let's talk about the current state of the U.S. drone industry. Specifically, something that's really active in the listener community right now, which is, as of December, you know what? I'm going to let you talk about it. You're far more educated on the issue, but let's put it simply. What are the U.S.'s current restrictions on foreign drone technology?
Well, as you said, as of December 22nd, 2025, the FCC came through with some things that had been talked about for a long time as a technology that would be restricted, and it's called the Covered List. And the FCC actually went broader with it than I think people were expecting in their December 22nd action, and that is to ban all foreign-made drones and critical components from receiving FCC approval for use in the United States. So as you know, any electronic device that has a radio in it, a drone has a radio in it, needs to apply for FCC approval and get an FCC ID number. And so that had been the mechanism that kind of drones were being approved under. And now with that covered list, that means that new models of DJI and other foreign-made drones will not be given approval. So that means that the foreign drone companies are going to have a lot harder time accessing the U.S. market. Now they can potentially come to the U.S. and set up production and work with the FCC and meet the requirements that they want. But others will probably have, some of the Chinese makers will probably have a pretty tough time doing that, because the regulation kind of explicitly came from different committees working on Capitol Hill that were concerned about national security, and specifically the development and advancement of drones made by the People's Republic of China. And so I don't think that it's very likely that Chinese makers will be easily able to get an FCC ID, but perhaps other countries that are more allied nations will be able to set up shop in the U.S., make drones in the U.S., and help fill the gap that's been created. But it was a broad, the covered list was broader and wider than I think most in the industry had expected. It had been talked about, I'd say, for a good 2+ years, and people didn't speculated would it happen, would it not happen, a lot of back and forth, and then it dropped on. So it's the rule of the law. What are the law of the land now?
Absolutely. You mentioned a bit of a gap there. So this legislation came down December 2025. There's a restriction on new foreign-made drones. Are there domestic alternatives that are ready? And if not, what are the risks right now?
Well, I think there's domestic alternatives that are ready, and then there's domestic alternatives that are being developed. And then at the same time, the ruling does not restrict the sale of existing models that obtained FCC certification. So models of like DJI Mini 4, you can still buy, although there can be some challenges getting a hold of it from other actions that the government has taken. But in general, you can purchase those in the United States. But DJI Mini 5, which is the newest edition, is not available for sale in the United States. So there is a supply, I think, of drones that are pretty capable, that are still available for purchase. But going forward, the U.S. industry needs to innovate and needs to kind of catch up with the state of the art. And the idea with this legislation is it's going to kind of give the breathing room for the U.S. industry to do that without facing what some in the industry had accused of these products being sort of dumped on the U.S. market at below cost, and making it very, very difficult for U.S. manufacturers to really be able to get into the game.
You hit on something there, and that is sort of getting in on the game. At the same time, we're at a period where supply chain vulnerabilities are becoming clear. Can you explain how fragmented drone systems create security and supply chain vulnerabilities? What is the solution at the end of this challenge?
Well, we think the solution at the end of the challenge is to build a system on a chip. That's what my company HYFIX is doing. And it's a system on a chip that consolidates the major functions of a drone, including positioning, flight control, secure communications, and AI and spatial computing capability. And the reason a system on a chip is helpful to the supply chain vulnerability is that consolidates so many parts. And if you look at today's modern integrated circuits, modern chips as we call them, most of them are not made in the United States. In fact, the vast majority are made in Taiwan, Korea, or even factories in Europe. But really a very small percentage of chips today, especially the ones that are in drones, which are popular in drones, like the STM32 microcontroller, Qualcomm, Snapdragon, CPU, GPU, not typically made in the United States. I don't think any of the STM32s, for example, are made in the United States. So you look through that supply chain, first of all, you have a lot of parts and none of them made in the United States. And that is a supply chain vulnerability, especially around a critical technology like drones, because when it does come to a conflict or some situation where there's geopolitical turmoil, you're not really sure who's going to be available to get, parts to you and who's not, where the restrictions are going to be, or where, even as we've seen within in the Iran conflict recently, like naval passages can get blocked. And so then you can be restricted from having access to the technology and parts you need to build drones. And that obviously has strategic implications. So I think the goal with a system on a chip is to, one, have something native, domestically produced, and the simplification of the supply chain. Both of those are big factors in what makes that a great approach to, solve some of the supply chain challenges.
Fantastically said. Let's take it back just a little bit, though, because you talked quite a bit about how you've combined all these things. What is this called? Is this the H1P?
Yeah, so we have the H1 is the core silicon, and we're calling it the autonomous systems chip, because the application of this chip is the kind of first dedicated system on a chip, really targeted for autonomous systems. Now, certainly a GPU platform combined with a MIPI interface and a separate radio and can do all these things, but really building one all-in-one package and doing it with an appropriate level of compute where you can do some AI, you can do full vehicle control, but not so much compute that it becomes, you need a huge battery pack or a very large vehicle, that you can take this all the way down to, say, a sub 250 gram drone. So that's the reason we created the H1, was to sort of hit small drones and small robots with something that was performant for AI, communications, positioning, and so forth, but not, overpower or overweight or over cost relative to the needs in that marketplace. And we're taking that H1 core chip and we're putting it into two modules. The H1P is the first one to come out, and that module is targeted at flight control and positioning, and it has our positioning stack in it. It ties into GEODNet. It runs PX4, and it has a free CPU in there, 64-bit, that can run Linux, can do other tasks that the customer wanted to do. And then we have the H1D that's coming out that couples that module with additional DDR and camera interface, and is really and radio, RF radio link. So that is targeted to be an entire drone module, and that will come out in September.
Oh, wow. Okay, that's incredible. So I've got to ask, having what can only be described as a community of passionate drone pilots who are now wondering where they're going to get their next kind of consumer grade drones, let me flip the question around before I ask the big one, which is, what's been the hardest part of building this in the US at this level?
Well, I think the supply chain in the US is complicated. So the packaging and testing, there are foundries here. So Global Foundries in Malta, New York, Samsung in Austin, Texas, Intel in Arizona, TSMC's building. So there are fabs that are available to run the front end, which is making the wafers, but then you also have the back end consideration of packaging and test. And then when you start to assemble up, from the chip level into boards and modules and things, there is supply. It is at a price premium relative to some of the international competitors, be it China or the Philippines or Malaysia. And so that's I think the challenge. Also, lead times tend to be a lot longer. So you take a part you want to make, a custom part, and in China you might be able to get that turned around in a week or something. In the US it might be 4 weeks. So these are things. Now there's a lot of community around reshoring technology, a lot of investment going in. So I expect these things will get better over time. But at the current state, you're paying a higher price, and it's taking longer to get things done. That's the bad news. On the good news, I think on the semiconductor side, there are some, really there's some good fabs that can produce chips in the US. And with like Intel 18A, for example, that's going to be catching up to where TSMC's at. It's a 1.8 nanometer process node, and it's going to offer, I think, incredible compute capability for everything, for AI, data centers, and all this stuff. So it's a work in process, I'd say, to get sort of all the manufacturing and electronics capability sort of more back on shore, but it's not, I don't think it's out of reach.
Very well said. Just to sort of summarize that, HYFIX is developing a chip that integrates GNSS positioning, flight control, secure communications, on-core compute, into a single American-made package. So when Mike says that's difficult, I hope some of that context explains why. How should I put this? I've never actually met somebody who's been in autonomous systems as long as you have. So I'm really curious whether it's something you've historically seen or something that's more forward-facing. What is something people get wrong when it comes to the future of autonomy?
Well, I think that the amount of kind of field work you need to do to really perfect a product kind of can catch people off guard. The prototype phase of building the hardware and getting some software to do initial stage autonomy oftentimes goes pretty quick, but the number of different things that can go wrong in the field is just very varied. And I think this is a place where AI is still kind of catching up. I'll give an example unrelated to drones, but recently Waymo had to kind of cut back on operations in some of the southeast states where they had just started out kind of running because of flooding. And their models and their training data just had not seen enough flooded roads to really handle that safely. So these are the kinds of edge cases, and they've been at that for well over a decade. And so that ringing out edge cases around these kinds of products is a hard fought battle. And that, I think, can get a lot of companies kind of off guard and end up with unhappy customers, no revenue, difficult conversation with investors, and where that goes.
Absolutely. Something that is really remarkable about one of the last projects you created, GEODNET, which I am intimately familiar with, partially from that point you were bringing up, which is when autonomous systems meet real-world applications, to put it simply, you encounter frictions. I think it's just a physical reality, particularly as a lot of people get very used to things being digitally frictionless. When they take their ideas into the real world, you see all the things that cause friction. But something that is extremely remarkable about GEODNET, it's decentralized. There are tens of thousands of ground reference stations, and it enables more resilient and accurate positioning than GPS alone, which is relevant to our discussion, easily jammed and spoofed. It's in over 145 countries, the largest RTK network globally, generates millions in annual revenue, and this is the part that really matters to me. It's a DPIN project, which is jargon that means decentralized physical infrastructure, which is also, in the world of crypto and blockchain, probably what I would call the biggest proving ground for, is this a real idea? I had a project manager from Spexion the other day, and as they put it, the single best way to determine if a crypto project is real is to look at their revenue. Is it a real business? Is it active in other countries? Do they have enterprise partners? And for the record, GEODNET does have enterprise partners like Drone Deploy and Questel and Photobots. I might have said that second one incorrectly. These new company names are killing me. Anyways, what I'm getting at is building an American-made drone seems like one of the hardest challenges somebody could take on. But frankly, so does building a decentralized ground reference station network to build more accurate positioning than GPS. And you've done that. And I would also add, and this is the part that I am so excited about, is how HYFIX seems to build on your experience and GEODNET's foundation. I'm just really excited about what your experience implies about what's coming up, because, let me just ask, where do you see the biggest opportunities in the next 3 to 5 years?
Well, I think drones and robotics, physical AI is going to be absolutely tremendous business opportunity. Clearly right now, LLMs and generative AI is really where the action is at. But I don't think you have to look too far forward to see something like Waymo scaling to millions of vehicles, and that really driving a whole new type of economy where physical work can be highly automated. And given physical work is like 70% of the total GDP on the planet, I think it could be incredibly transformational and really free up people's time kind of completely. And so I'm super pumped up about that. Drones is a big part of that. Drones is, I think, an early win, and it's already happening at pretty amazing scale. There are, 20 odd million drones produced every year. Some of those for consumers, some of those for commercial, some of those for agriculture, some of those, small number right now for drone delivery, but I'm sure that will grow. And, some of those obviously used in the military. So it's an example of like how effective physical AI can be. but I think there'll be more and more physical AI to come. Ground robots, humanoids, all that stuff. It's just right really around the corner. And I come back to why. It's really the cost of the hardware is tractable to build the equipment, and the AI and the compute is there to make it work well. So while the tuning cycles may be a little bit longer and take a bit more time to get through because there's safety considerations and practical things like waterproofing and stuff like that to work through that you wouldn't have in, say, a generative AI model. On the other hand, there's more, there can be very, very direct, tangible payback for these things. I believe, like farming, for example, what an important and huge industry that is just right around the corner, I think, to be completely automated. And that's going to allow for, food prices to go down and, much more effective use of just the land and water and gas and resources. So that's an area where you could really see full autonomy at the robotics level. It's just making an enormous societal impact.
Absolutely. What would you say a healthy domestic autonomous system stack actually looks like? And you mentioned it's around the corner. How far away are we from it, actually?
Yeah, I think we're there. I think it's a lot of it's still just putting the pieces together. There's some great building blocks. So for like the H1 chip, we focus on two kind of core open source projects as kind of baseline infrastructure. One is the PX4 autopilot, and a huge shout out to the creators and all the supporters of that project over the year to build it into such a nicely architected piece of code with really good baseline autopilot infrastructure, including advanced Kalman filters and good control loops and just all the stuff you need. And then Robot Operating System, ROS2, provides you the infrastructure for more advanced vision and bringing in models and all the plumbing you need in terms of data logging and kind of sharing of data across different tasks within an autonomous system. So those are two core pieces of software infrastructure. Sensors are there, whether you're a camera-only advocate or you like camera plus LiDAR. Obviously, for outdoor positioning, RTK is huge. We're really excited. We have a partnership both with GEODNET, tracking low Earth orbit satellites, and then in the HYFIX chip, using those low Earth orbit satellites with a company called Zona Space Systems, which is launching these satellites. That gives you a signal that's 100 times stronger than GPS, but kind of acts like GPS, penetrates deep indoors, gives you precise timing reference, allows, when it's full constellation, it will allow for positioning both indoors and in much more contested and interfered environments. So whether it's a cell tower that's interfering with GPS or it's an actual active jammer, it's going to be much harder to corrupt these low Earth orbit signals because they're just way stronger. So the infrastructure, sensors, compute, these things are there. There's certainly a gap in practical experience. There can be a gap in regulations. There can be over-regulation. I'd argue in the case of drones that some of the things that are holding back the really massive usage of drone technology has been regulation that's been maybe too conservative in some cases. I think if we, certainly within the United States, if we look at kind of how quickly China's moved on the low altitude economy, they've moved more aggressively. And that's something that I know the current administration is trying to fix. And it's important because we want that to flourish. That's a huge win. Think about every time you do a drone delivery of food, how much more the total efficiency of that relative to driving it to you is just extraordinary. The cost, the actual physical cost to fly a drone from a supermarket to someone's home in the neighborhood is probably like the electricity cost for that's probably at most $1. And compare that to having somebody get in a car, get on a road, add pollution to the environment, get stuck in traffic just to get 2 miles from the grocery store to your house. I think we can all say that drone delivery, offers a huge benefit. So seeing that these kinds of tech expand, that ties into regulation. I think some of the autonomous car technology also ties into regulation. And I get we need to be careful and be safe. And we also need to think through privacy around these systems. But at the same time, they offer, I think, a real way to move society forward.
Exceptionally well said, Mike. I notice we're just at time. So first of all, I want to say thank you. But second of all, where can people follow you and learn more about what you're doing with HYFIX?
Yeah, so our website is hyfix.ai, and we are active also on X and LinkedIn. So I recommend give us a follow on whichever of those two you like, and look forward to keeping up.
Absolutely. I will make sure there are links to all those things in the show notes of this episode. But once again, Mike, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Bryce, for having me.
And thank you all for listening. Thanks for being a part of the Drone Network. Subscribe wherever fine podcasts are served to get a new episode every week. And remember to leave us a 5-star review on your podcast app of choice. It helps a lot. Today's show was sponsored by SPEXI Geospatial and Layer Drone. Learn more about standardized drone imagery built for global scale at spexi.com. That's SPEXI.com and layerdrone.org. Thanks again for listening.